think that essentially by being small L liberals, we've accidentally encouraged the growth of an authoritarian power like the CCP because, what I learned in college, things like, well, there shouldn't be like a dominant power like the US. Like, why does America have to be a world police? Why, like, isn't it better? Like the whole like end of history thing, right? Like, aren't we all going to become liberal democracies?
That was the hope. That was the hope that in the 90s we felt that, Fukuyama said we are at the end of history. We're all democracies. We're going to be democracies. It just wasn't the case, and if we abdicate our responsibility as a world policeman in favor of democracy, in favor of diversity and freedom, another world policeman will take over that vacuum of power. And that's exactly what the CCP is doing.
So you're saying we should be the world policeman, but one that believes in freedom.
Yeah. I mean, once we get rid of the worst dictators, the one that can actually threaten to take over the world, then you can back off again and become the hands-off, community policeman.
But then there's going to be another authoritarian power that develops?
If one develops, then you again have to step up. So you have to have a process and a method and a plan for stepping up when necessary and then backing off to allow freedom again when you can't.
Well, I guess that's supposedly the idea of the checks and balances of the United States, that something like that would be possible, but there are enough checks and balances that then you aren't stuck with like, okay, well now this is just the new dictator.
But of course, once, someone gets a little bit of power temporarily, they typically want to hang on to it.
That's why we love our 4 and 8 year term limits, right? They got to go after 8 years.
Well, I mean, but that came about because of FDR, right? And he had 4 terms. By, the end of his 3rd term, like he was so powerful, he was controlling all sorts of institutions in a very direct way. He was taking on a lot more power for the federal government. But then there was a big shift where Congress is like, okay, like neither party wants that to be a thing again because we see how dangerous it is. So actually, there was a constitutional amendment passed, which is a pretty big deal to actually diffuse that power, right? And now to try to make the president a little weaker.
Well, I guess that's the idea of that power concentrates. As soon as there is somebody who gets power, more and more power will come to that person or institution, whatever.
They will gather it.
By hook or by crook. And so I guess that's why we have a system where, like, before that can happen, it gets broken up.
Well, when it becomes so powerful, is there a way to diffuse power?
Yeah, I think that your example is an excellent one. We have to institutionalize. So institutions can be used to promote the concentration of power. Or they can be used if they're hierarchical or if they're non-hierarchical institutions that ensure that you damp down the hierarchy as it grows, then it's a very positive institution that you hold on to and that you protect. And that's what we have in our Constitution is a system for deconcentrating power through checks and balances, through term limits, et cetera. We do not have that system in place yet on an international level in dealing with China. China is breaking all the rules. It's figuring out, they're being very, very smart about how they aggregate power. So we essentially have to think of new systems. We really have to think out of the box, and we need to be quite active and tough in enforcing some of the systems that we put in place after World War II. Because what Xi Jinping is doing is not that different in many ways from what Hitler tried to do. And the rules that came after Hitler in terms of territorial integrity, diversity of religion, protections of religion, human rights, promotion of democracy, all of those things are perfect for containing the power of China. But we have to put them in place. We have to enforce them against China.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Hitler because this podcast is going on the internet where everything has to have a reference to Hitler. Yeah. But what are some things that people don't typically think of? And people think Nazis tried to take over territory. Nazis, killed 6 million Jews. and some other groups, although in smaller numbers. But like, what are some things that China is doing that are comparable to the Nazis, like in other ways that we maybe don't think about?
Well, I think in terms of territorial aggrandizement, they really are trying to do many things in terms of South China Sea, taking over the South China Sea. South China Sea is as big as India. Okay, they're trying to grab Taiwan. They're grabbing Taiwan based on a racist ethnic justification. They're Chinese, therefore they belong to us. That's exactly what Hitler did in terms of trying to grab German populations that were outside the borders of Germany. It's what Putin is doing in terms of trying to grab Russian populations in Georgia and Ukraine. Right? It's profoundly racist. It's profoundly illiberal, and it's very, very dangerous. Obviously. So, I mean, I think, and it goes on and on. The viewers, I think, have been educated by you guys very well on China's territory grabs in India, in Bhutan. They grabbed territory in Vietnam. People don't know that still they have some of Vietnamese actual territory. In terms of the genocide, by the UN definition of genocide, there's arguably a triple genocide going on in China, not only against the Uyghurs, but against Falun Gong and against the Tibetans, because they're trying to wipe out religions. If you have a religion and a government is trying to wipe out that religion, that's technically a genocide by the UN definition.
Right. So, like, why does, to me, this is kind of an obvious thing, but like, why does the CCP want to wipe out religions? Like, why do they want to wipe out the sort of Muslim religion? Why do they want to wipe out Falun Gong, which is a kind of religion or spiritual thing? Why do they want to wipe out Tibetan Buddhism? Like, what is their advantage to that? Because it really pisses people off.
I think they're power hungry. I mean, they're just profoundly power hungry, and they want a unified ideology. They see these religions as threats to the CCP. They see these religions as threats to communism. Marx was always against religion of any type. And I think it, largely it was because it was a form of power, it was a form of hierarchy that was not a communist hierarchy, and which therefore he and Lenin didn't have control.
Okay, so it's like the Catholic Church, for example, is its own sort of powerful hierarchy. And if you're Catholic and you live in, say, the United States or in Latin America or any place where it's popular, right? Like, you are going to be loyal perhaps to the church before you're loyal to the government or to the president, right? So that's essentially the threat so that the Communist Party sees.
Well, I think this is an interesting point that, speaking of the Vatican, China obviously has a lot of power over the Vatican, as we've seen. And, we talk about these hierarchies of power, and it seems like forces that seem so dominant, whether you're talking about religious institutions like the Vatican or, these gigantic American mega corporations, all of these hierarchies seem so powerful, and yet China was able to absorb them all. What is it about the Chinese Communist Party systems or actions that allows them to draw in these other seemingly incredibly powerful hierarchies?
I think one of the biggest things is that they know that they have a lot of power because they can turn on and off these individuals or groups access to the Chinese market. So, for example, the Vatican wants access to the Christians, the Catholics who live in China. The only way it can get access to these Christians is by an agreement with the CCP authorities. And if you look in history, actually, it's often the way states are built and empowered is they have access to something. They have access to they're gatekeepers of something. So, for example, in Argentina, the way the state was built in Argentina was the leading powers had control of a big river, and a lot of trade was on that river. And so, what they did was they taxed that, and through that tax, they empowered themselves and they got control of the hinterland and created the state of Argentina. So it's a process that that happens in many, many countries and many hierarchies around the world. And it is also something we need to think about in terms of currently because the U.S. Navy has more power than the Chinese Navy right now on a global level, where we have a blue water Navy that can actually control global shipping. China doesn't have that, right? We are not actually using the power that we have because we allow Chinese shipping anywhere globally to just operate. So China's using this freedom that they have to grow and grow their economy. And then once that economy and their military actually can beat the US Navy and the Chinese start taking over the waters, the global trade, they could actually tax global trade, use it to even build their military further. And that's where you really see global hegemony picking up for the Chinese.
I think that's a big reason they're so desperate for control over the South China Sea. Like $5 trillion of shipping go through there. If they can control that.
I mean, what
Oh my
can the
gosh,
U.S. do about it, though?
I'm just thinking like imagine China controlling in like 50 years, controlling all the world's oceans. Like that's what they would want, right? South China Sea is just the first step.
It would be an ocean of despair.
Okay. They're not.
Go ahead, Shelley.